hitting going live now. Okay, and we are live. Hello, everybody. My name is Malik. I am one of the OutWrite co-chairs, and we are here for one of our final panels today. So I'm not going to say too much because I don't want to take time away from the panel, but I do have to share this sponsor video from sharing information about the AIDS Healthcare Foundation and Gilead, two of the DC Center's platinum level sponsors. The DC Center is the parent organization for OutWrite, and the donations given to us by these two organizations allows us to do arts programming that allows like OutWrite and our film festival Real Affirmations to happen. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen, share that video with you all, and then we will get into our panel. Let's get into it. Okay, and then we can hide these controls. It's like super meta. Cool.
My name is Paul Ramos. I'm an MA, medical assistant PCS2, and I've been in the company for 5 years. I choose to work in AHF to carry the heart and soul for my dad. My late dad, he was diagnosed with HIV and AIDS. Every time I see a patient, I know that he's looking over me and he knows that I did it for him.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Zoraida Jiménez y soy la manager de práctica de la oficina de Falls Church in Virginia. So what has surprised me more about the company culture is of my immediate manager taking her time to really train me one-on-one, making sure that I understand and I do the job that I need to do to succeed in my role.
Hi, my name is Simply Sandy. I'm a non-medical case manager here at the K Street location. Chose to work at AHF because it is a phenomenal company. The company allowed me to spread my wings, if you will. They allowed me to continue doing what I love to do, and that's serving the public. I feel as though we are a family, and I could not do what I do by myself.
My name is Dominita Morrow. I'm the office administrator for the Temple Hills AHF location. I choose to work for AHF because I like to give back to my community. My favorite thing about working with AHF is how much the organization gives to the community, how they help our patients, help them grow, the tools that they give them that our patients can't find at any other clinic.
The thing that surprised me about working for AHF, which I enjoyed, the teamwork, the employees, it's a really great work environment. You look forward to actually getting up and coming to work. AHF is one of those companies that I will say that really looks out and really cares about their employees.
My name is Sade. I'm a technician here in Baltimore, and I work with AHF because I really enjoy taking care of my patients, and I like their mission statement of being patient first, of putting patient care over profit, and getting our co-pays as close to zero as possible. I love that part.
The average baseball stadium holds about 50,000 people, enough to fill a dance floor the size of a New York City block. It was also the number of people in the US who became HIV positive every year since 2003. Then, something happened. One by one, we said, enough is enough. Instead of waiting for a cure, we took action. We got tested and retested. We talked to each other, and we talked to healthcare providers about HIV prevention options. People living with HIV started treatment right away and stuck to it, which can prevent the spread of HIV through sex. New infections went down, but we still have work to do. So let's all do our part and keep fighting, because together we can all help stop the virus. Find out what you can do at helpstopthevirus.com.
Okay, Thank you so much, everyone, for that. And without further ado, I will disappear and hand it over to John.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Be Gay, Do Crime, Queer Crime Writers in Conversation. Thank you all for coming out and hanging out with us on Sunday afternoon. My name is John Copenhaver, and I am a crime writer. I write historical mysteries set in the 1940s and 50s. Usually investigating LGBTQ issues during those time periods through sort of a mystery story. I'm also a professor or adjunct professor at VCU, and I'm teaching a course this fall called Be Gay, Do Crime. So I'm really interested in this sort of discussion of criminality, both and the intersection of crime fiction and how crime fiction can be a really interesting way of investigating social issues. Before we jump into conversation, though, I want to both welcome and introduce my panelists and get them to tell you a little bit about themselves. You can read their bios are on the website, but I figure it would be a little more fun to have them speak for themselves in this fashion. So we'll start with Meredith Denge. Her book, her newest book, Whereabouts Unknown, is a serial killer book, right? And so, anyway, you tell me a little. You talk about it. I don't want to.
All right. Thanks, Don. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Meredith Denge. I'm a queer crime writer of the Luce Hansen thriller series, and most recently, as John said, the standalone thriller Whereabouts Unknown. And I'm an English professor at the University of Dayton in Ohio. But I generally write detective procedurals with lesbian protagonists that feature some sort of justice happening in some way or another, whether it's legal or not. There's some sort of answering to justice that's happening. I'm also really interested in the intersection of sexuality and people with health conditions or impairments. And I particularly dove into that with Whereabouts Unknown. The book has two main points of view characters. One is the detective, and then another is a victim. We could call her that. But they are both exceptionally strong females, but they are also both navigating some sort of a health condition. One has an autoimmune disease called lupus, and the other has a career-threatening shooting or injury. And so that's sort of where I'm at.
Cool, very cool. Kelly Ford is our next author. Kelly J. Ford is our next author, and her newest book, Real Bad Things, comes out in early September, right? September 6th, 7th?
September 1st.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. It's currently an Amazon First Reads book, so that's why it feels like it's already out. Kind of my soft launch. So yes, I'm Kelly J. Ford. She, her. I write about crime and queer desires set in Arkansas, where I'm from. Most of my books, I constantly don't know what to call them. Suspense perhaps is probably the closest, but I do like getting categorized into rural, noir, grit lit. So a lot about the South, a lot about working class, middle class families. And basically my characters are queer and they're ordinary people who encounter extraordinary things.
Wonderful. Robyn Gigl, will you share with us about survivor's guilt, excuse me.
Hi, John. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. And what an honor to be with this panel. As I said, I'm Robyn Gigl, she, her, and I am an attorney, a bit of an activist, and also an author. I also happen to be a transgender woman. So the book that John just held up, Survivor's Guilt, is book 2 in the Erin McCabe series. And Erin McCabe just happens to be a transgender criminal defense lawyer. Go figure where I came up with that idea. Write what you know is what they say. The first book in the series, By Way of Sorrow, came out in 2021. Survivor's Guilt came out this year. And if I don't remember anything about either one of those books, it's because I am about to submit book 3 in the series, Remain Silent. And so I have read Remain Silent so many times over the last few weeks that I don't know anything else. But the stories follow Erin McCabe and her partner, Dwayne Swisher, both lawyers and involved in a law partnership, and the cases that they take on in both By Way of Sorrow, a transgender sex worker, and in Survivor's Guilt, a client who we're not sure who they are until about halfway through, so I won't spoil it, but it deals with a lot of sexual violence, not in an explicit way, but the world in which we live in terms of dealing with those kinds of issues.
Wonderful, wonderful. Cheryl Head, tell us a little bit about your Charlie Mack series.
Sure, John. Thank you for having us. Thank you to Outreach. Happy to be with this really excellent group of authors. The Charlie Mack Motown Mystery Series is set in Detroit in the mid-2000s. It features the first African-American bisexual professional private investigator. The series has covered topics such as lots of social justice topics, the killing the homeless people, the hate group crimes, domestic terrorism, also things as mundane as missing persons, but they always lead to something more than that. I'm having a lot of fun writing the series. The last book in the series, which is out now, Warn Me When It's Time, really looks at, in 2009, the nascent beginnings of alt-right hate groups in Michigan, 11 years before last year's group who tried to kidnap and murder the governor of Michigan. So I'm really always trying to infuse these books with topicality, but also with how people of color and communities of color look at justice. And so that's one of the ongoing themes in the book.
Wonderful, wonderful. Last but not least, Edwin Hill. And this is The Secrets We Share, but this is a standalone, which is a little departure for you, right?
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for having me today. Actually, that was the art cover. This is the real cover.
Oh yeah, this is the old cover. I have some.
That's right. They decided to change the cover before they printed the real books. So thanks for having me. My name's Edwin Hill. I would say I write pretty intricately plotted suspense novels that are told from many different points of view. And they're about deeply flawed characters who often have made decisions in the past that come back to haunt them in big and small ways. I mean, so we're all sort of, we reflect who we are through the decisions that we've made in our lives. For people, if you like Kate Atkinson, the Jackson Brody series, or even if you like Louise Penny, the Inspector Gamache series, you'd probably like my books too. I always try to infuse them with a little bit of humor. Though you may not see the humor, maybe only I see the humor. But I also try and get, one of the things I really try to establish with all these books is this sense of found family. So the book that I just wrote, the one we just held the cover up for, it is a standalone, but it actually explores some of the characters from my series books as well. And I just try to expand that found family that's at the center of all the novels in each subsequent novel.
It's so interesting that you mentioned humor. This is just a side note, but I find that when I read for like a queer LGBTQ audience of some sort, they always get the humor that I try to put in it. I don't always get that in other venues because I kind of have a dark sense of humor, I think. So it's not always apparent. But so I want to start off the discussion with just a general question about why do you think that crime fiction is well suited for tackling social issues, particularly social issues that affect LGBTQ plus people? Or do you disagree with that? That's also an option, of course. Maybe talk a little bit about how your particular subgenre or your particular style or point of view goes about addressing that. And I'll pick on Cheryl first.
Oh, I knew you were going to do that.
I'm obvious, I guess.
Well, yes, I think crime fiction is just ripe for looking at issues that impact all marginalized communities, and so therefore LGBTQ plus communities. I think that, like a lot of us, we're writing about not only what's happening in the present, but we're kind of portending what we see as issues that will come up in the future. We're at a time now where there's just an assault on LGBTQ rights, assault on transgender rights. I know all of our writing takes that into account, tries to kind of be the place where we sound the alarm about staying vigilant to look at the injustices that come to our communities and all communities that are marginalized. I think crime fiction's right for that. I think about when I write my series, one of my, this is just my personal approach to things, but I love the fact that I can, bring revenge to bear on some of the folks that I don't like, so I have a white male protagonist who's a partner of Charlie's in my series, who I love, but there are not many other white men in my series do well. I call them out, I challenge them, and occasionally they are killed.
It's true how you do. I think in crime fiction, there is a working out of, well, I'm speaking for myself, but the anger that I think you feel is a place to put that anger. Robyn, what do you think? How do you think this is, and particularly through a legal thriller, you must, address this a great deal.
I agree with Cheryl that yes, I mean, this is a genre that's ripe for dealing with social issues. And in my case, because I'm writing legal thrillers, I can deal with those in the context of the legal world. It's interesting, all of my books, the first book, By Way of Sorrow, was set in 2007, 2008, Survivor's Guild 2009, and Remain Silent will be set in 2009 as well. And when I first started to write them, of course, as I said, I'm a trans woman and my main protagonist is a trans criminal defense lawyer. I wanted to set up, when I was writing them, I wanted to set them at a time when I thought I could deal with a lot of the issues dealing with the trans community in the past, because I started writing By Way of Sorrow in 2015, and it looked like we were on a different path. I mean, President Obama was doing great things, and I put them in the past thinking, well, hopefully by the time, if they ever get published, things will be much better. I wasn't prescient enough to know that things were going to go backwards on us. And so what's happened is they've taken on a renewed relevance, and both By Way of Sorrow and Survivor's Guild, I wanted to write legal thrillers that anybody would enjoy. The straightest cisgender person would be sitting there going, this is a page turner, I really love it. So my target audience wasn't necessarily, a trans audience, but I wanted to educate people about issues that impact the trans community, and hopefully maybe a little bit subversively just build it into the legal thriller so they didn't even realize that they were getting an education. I will say, as Cheryl noted, like so much is going on right now in terms of LGBTQ plus issues, and in particular about trans issues. Remain Silent has become my angriest book. And in dealing with issues impacting the trans community, and I'm not sure that cisgender straight person that I wrote the first two novels hoping that they'd pick up and read as a legal thriller, I'm not sure that they're going to enjoy Remain Silent, because it's an angry book. And as Cheryl said, there's some revenge that takes place. So, but I do think the genre is a wonderful way to explore these issues, and I have a lot of fun with it. So
wonderful. Kelly, tell us about your sort of take on this.
Yeah, I mean, our lives are politicized without our permission, so it's kind of ripe for attacking social issues. And in my books, I'm writing about people who are not necessarily involved in crimes on purpose. They're kind of accidental criminals in many cases. And a lot of what I'm showing is not so much featuring their sexuality, but just having a crime story that features queer characters, because there is so much about being a queer person that these microaggressions that you experience, and weaving those into a story in a way that makes the tension more palpable. And so many of these issues are around housing inequality and neglect, that sort of thing, where you're kind of like, it's not these big homophobic things that I feel like, I saw growing up. I was a Gen X latchkey kid where, if there was gay trauma, it was gay trauma, and those things are really important. But I think it's also important to put a mirror up to society to show how these little things, it's like that famous line about 1,000 cuts, right? And just holding a mirror up to other people, like Robyn, you said, to some, the readers of your third book, and saying, if you're uncomfortable, that's something to examine, right? So I think, it's definitely important and can tackle that.
It's interesting sort of about, talking about the smaller, or not smaller, but the like the 1,000 paper cuts kind of thing. 5,000 paper cuts is, it's something I think of a lot about in education, where you feel like people are, the big issues seem to be resolved, but they're not. And
right.
now all that stuff is coming up, and now it's even more, it's really, it's not the stuff that we thought was all fixed, or some people thought was all fixed, I should say. It's not any, it's clearly not. Meredith, tell us about your point of view on this.
So all of my books so far have featured somebody who's working in law enforcement, either as a homicide detective, or they've been like a special agent or FBI. And, I think a lot about how those spaces that these characters are inhabiting have not been open or not been welcoming to LGBTQ people in the past. And how these characters can maybe disrupt that space a little bit, cause some trouble, make them think a little bit differently than what they've thought before. Generally, they're the only person who works in their division or on their team, however I have it set up, that is LGBTQ. Occasionally, there'll be like one other person who is, but I did a lot of interviewing of female detectives and people who are working in the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation who were female. And that was one of the things that they talked about all the time, as being the only LGBTQ person that was in their whole floor or in their whole, division, things like that. So I kind of want to normalize that a little bit more, that we have these people who are working in spaces that might not have been open to them in the past, and now are, or now at least opening the door a little bit.
And you're also really addressing ableism too. Particularly this new book is that's also a concern, clearly a social concern. But how does that intersect with the sort of world?
Well, I hadn't given it a tremendous amount of thought in terms of for law enforcement and that crossover. And I have a really good friend who was sort of like pushed towards the retirement track when she had an injury while she was working in the field. And it's amazing to me, first of all, how young someone can retire if they're working, in law enforcement. But then on top of that, it's almost like they can start a second career, but it also can be this way of just devastation. Like, it's over. Like, what do I do now? And that's kind of where my friend was really in that situation. And so I gave it a lot of thought, because I was kind of, hearing so much about her journey and stuff like that. But there's not a lot of room in any of the fields that I kind of have been writing about for people who are disabled. And one of the things that always cracks me up is that I think about this a lot, that readers, and even I'm going to put myself in this, I love for my heroes in crime fiction to be strong and mighty and like go in there and just tear them up and get it done, right? But the reality is it's their brains that really solve the problem, right? It's not so much this like brawn and mightiness. It's how quick-witted they are and how fast they can think on their feet and make a new plan and, you know, all of those kinds of things. So, and you don't have to be perfectly able to think well and all of those things. So I think that there's a lot of room in law enforcement. And I speak of this as somebody who's not in law enforcement. So I kind of have to take a step back sometimes, but that is something I think, and maybe even just in all jobs, not just law enforcement, we could open up positions for people, you know, that we haven't necessarily thought about in the past.
Absolutely. Edwin.
Well, this is such an interesting question because, of course, we're writing about crime and we're writing about violence, and that's such an interesting lens to look at the world through. Period, and to look at, you know, any community through, or the impact of that violence on whomever you're writing about, and the characters that you're writing about. I have a character who's been in all of my books, who's a lesbian, and I think one of the things I've really tried to do, with kind of getting at what Meredith was talking about, what I've tried to do with that character is just to expand her world in each of the books, so that readers who are either staying with all of the books or coming to the books new, they're just sort of learning more and more about her each time. I think it was you, Cheryl. We were on another call maybe a year and a half ago or so, and you said one of the things that you wanted to see more of in queer crime fiction was relationships between people in different generations. And I thought, that's interesting. And so I sort of worked that into this novel. So I have two women who are in a relationship, and one is much older than the other one. And one of the interesting things so my books are, they're about relationships, they're about this expanding group of people. And so I'm not exploring some deep social issues like some of my fellow panelists. However, I will tell you this, I got this review that just shocked me this year on Goodreads the other day from someone who wrote that she loved the book. She was like, oh, this is great characters. And then she said, except I couldn't support the homosexual agenda. 1 star. And so I was like really shocked. You know, it was like, whatever, I have a very thick skin. It didn't affect me that much. But I was still kind of stunned by it, because you're right. We are still in a world where people will write something like that in a public forum.
Yeah, after in the wake of like the Lammy thing, I got a lot of negative press. So I mean, I feel like particularly June was what it may have been a month to celebrate LGBTQ people, but I felt a lot of hate coming from
terrible.
Yeah, so that doesn't surprise me at all. You know, I think one thing that I'm fascinated, I'm always going to ask about this, and I know we probably have a lot of writers who are watching as well, is what is a particular challenge that you have faced in your craft, and particularly in writing thrillers or mysteries? And of course, this could be thematic, or it could be, you know, more of a structural thing. I'll let you decide, but let's see. I'll begin with Meredith. What do you think?
Okay. So I run into this in pretty much everything I write. And I call this my Scooby-Doo moment, where everybody kind of collects in the same area. And it's like, okay, we're going to rip off all the masks now. We're going to find out who did it. And then we're going to explain how that person did it. And we're going to go, you know, step by step, and everyone's going to be on the same page. And that drives me crazy as a writer, but also, I mean, I enjoy it as a reader, because then I can kind of put my pieces together. But I can feel the Scooby-Doo moment happening. It's like I can feel them conjoining into this room. And so as a writer, like that's my biggest craft thing that I can't stand, but I also can't really seem to get away from it, because it feels so needed with a thriller, you know, with a mystery. I don't know. I probably watched way too much Scooby-Doo as a kid, but.
Yeah, I watched a lot of Scooby-Doo too.
This is Agatha Christie, you guys. It's not Scooby-Doo.
What did you say?
I said, this is Agatha Christie.
Yeah, Scooby-Doo, pretty, but that whole ripping off the mask thing.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, right, it's so important. Cheryl, what do you think? What's hard for you?
Well, mine is probably personal to me. I write noir, and I really am a fan of classic noir, so I do have some trouble with the relationship part of the writing, especially romantic relationship. I'm getting better and better at it. I do note, however, that I think the crime fiction that comes from writers of color and queer writers often has more focus on relationship than classic noir, and I think that's a good thing. I think our protagonists have lives and more character than the kind of one-dimensional characters we might see, like Hercule Poirot. So I'm not. I like that. I like that we are seeing protagonists who have lives and relationships. But when it comes to infusing my crime fiction with romance, I'm pitifully bad.
It's interesting. It is. I find it to be something I really write. It's not so much a challenge for me as it is something that surprises me that I write as much about as I do, if that makes any sense. Maybe I'm more of a romantic than I want to.
You are a romantic, yes.
Kelly, what do you think?
Meanwhile, Cheryl, I'm all vibes, all character. I throw some shit on a page and I'm like, that's plot, right? It's not. Yeah, plot is often the hardest thing for me, which I think shocks people when I say that. I don't know. Because it's a story, you should have it. But I am so focused on description and setting, like I go on. And, my editor notes are always like, wow, we need to cut like those 2 chapters because something needs to happen.
Kelly, can you edit my next book? Because I stink at setting.
Just all need to
yes, definitely. If you help me with plot, you've got a deal. Yeah, so it's very hard for me. And so I have to be very diligent about outlining, and I have chapter by chapter synopses so I can keep track of everything, because it turns out you can't just throw shit on a page. You actually have to make sense. So who knew?
Challenge though, shaping it. It can be beautiful shit. You just have to shape it a little bit. I find. Sometimes. Robyn.
I was serious when I was listening to Kelly. I was like, we are 180 degrees apart. I can't do setting. I can't do exposition. That's the hardest thing for me. I love the dialogue and the plot. That the dialogue comes so easy. I can see my characters. I can hear what they're saying. And in terms of plot, I've had this interesting dichotomy of when I wrote By Way of Sorrow, it really was fly by the seat of my pants. I mean, I just wrote it as I went along, and the characters took the story where it was going to go. And I found out that when you get signed to a 2-book deal, your editor wants to see what book 2 is going to look like, or they agree for you to publish it. So I had to do that outline and do everything else. And I found that I couldn't stick to the outline because I just love the way things take off and go in different directions. So, plotting, the dialogue, those are things that I love. The settings, the exposition. Kelly, please, I'm gonna send you a draft of my next book. Help.
You got it.
Edwin, what's your what's the thing that's difficult for you?
Well, all of the above. But to add to that, I would say that, and Robyn and I have the same editor, and I should tell you this, Robyn, the book that just came out, when I sent my proposal into him, it was about a private school in New Hampshire that this couple ran, and the book that I turned into him after a year later was about 2 sisters who lived in West Roxbury. So anyway, don't be beholden to your outline, but also don't do what I do. The thing I've been struggling with recently is like motive. It's like you're writing about crime and like it's like a big deal to kill someone. FYI. And like so to get to a point where like you can come up with a motive for someone to make this like incredibly drastic decision. And to make it believable, right? And so then I'll be like, why do people kill each other? And I'll go online and I'll start reading like like real things, current events or whatever, reports, and people kill people for like the dumbest reasons in the world. And like if you wrote a book about it, no one would believe it because it's so dumb. So anyway, that has been one of the things that has been challenging me recently.
Yeah,
and that's not good because I have a book due in a month, FYI.
I think I'll include myself in this, but I think that one of the things for me is that I kind of switch my brain. It's hard for me to do two things at once. So when I'm like writing dialogue, I kind of forget that they're there physically, if that makes any sense. It's like I did a lot of like playwriting when I was younger, like in high school and stuff. I think I just like that clicks in and I'm like, oh, but they're actually physical. They're not just sitting there talking. And then when I'm like, describing stuff, It's like, how do you, I feel like it's just like you always have to go back and kind of like blend in the thing that you weren't focusing on. And I'm always like, how did I miss that? So, moving on, like one thing that I'm sure, and I'm curious about too, is crime fiction tropes or stereotypes that particularly rankle or bother you. Now, these can be, of course, related to LGBTQ plus identity being represented. That's always useful. Also, we don't have to answer it. It can be any kind of stereotype that pops up, particularly in our genre, that is troublesome or problematic. Who wants to begin? Let's see. Robyn, let's start with you.
I was listening to Meredith in her last answer, and that Scooby-Doo moment where everybody gets together, and yeah, that kind of like, I like to build the suspense slowly. And then that big reveal at the end, it kind of, that's something that I like to try to avoid. You have to tie up the loose ends, but you don't have to. I tend to tell my people what's going on, my readers as I go along, and they generally know more than my characters do. And I guess, look, as a trans woman, as a trans author, and I don't think we see it as much anymore, but, you used to have, bury your gays, then it seemed to evolve into bury your trans. The trans character was there to be eliminated, and whether they were the victim or they were just on the side or whatever, but they were never three-dimensional characters. I think that's changing, and hopefully it's changing, and certainly as more trans writers enter the field, that's wonderful. But I mean, certainly using a trans character just to set up a scene where they're going to be eliminated, and everyone knows they're going to be eliminated, or they're already dead, and it's the investigation. It's Law and Order. They come to the body of the dead trans woman, and that's the story, and that's her only involvement. So those tropes still bother me, but again, hopefully we're getting better at that.
Kelly.
Yeah, I agree. Of course, bury your gays is always the number one trope that makes me irk. But going back to something Edwin and Robyn both said is, talking about motive and everything kind of wrapped up. And I'm like, when I think about it, that's really the thing I hate so much is that, and I don't know if it's truly just for queer characters, but I feel like so much about a queer character needs to be spoon-fed to readers, which is sometimes really frustrating because not all of us have those big coming out moments or those really tragic moments, and you just want your characters to have their life experiences. And so I often feel like so much more is required of queer authors to explain, but why are they sexually attracted or something? And it's like, just like how people kill people for dumb reasons. It's like, sometimes it's truly like that, guys. It really is not deeper than that. So maybe that's a weird, quirky one, but sometimes I just want to say, because they got the vibes, they want it. Does it have to be something deep and emotional? Sometimes it's just sex.
Yeah, I think that's also, there's something about that I agree with you, Kelly. That's like the thing. I think there's something about like people wanting to explain it, and that gets back to it like being a problem, like a psychological.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
educate me on why I should have no problem with your particular identity.
Right, exactly. Meredith.
Yeah, I kind of like going back with Robyn, what Robyn was saying about tying up everything. I just really, I mean, it bothers me a lot because in real life, I mean, I know that our fiction isn't real life, but so many wrong avenues are taken, so many red herrings are investigated, and there are still loose ends usually at the end of a case. There's still some things that we don't know, and only the people who are involved are going to know. So yeah, that's what I would think.
Yeah, it's interesting about it. I was teaching in a program this summer, and this other presenter, it was a grad student, was presenting and railed against Tana French's first book, In the Woods. If you guys know that, it's pretty well known big loose end at the end of the book. And I was like, why can't we do that?
Exactly.
I was like, maybe we need to embrace loose ends more. Cheryl.
So mine's much more frivolous than all the heady stuff you guys have just been talking about. Mine is the sidekick syndrome, the Ethel Mertz syndrome, you know, the sidekick who doesn't get to have a full personality, and we get to really know who they are, especially when they're queer sidekicks. And I see this not only in novels, but on television shows, you know, the guy or the gal who holds the purse, you know, it's just, I love the series Gracie and Frank, and you know, the one daughter owns a business and runs a business, and she has this gay guy who comes in every once in a while who keeps her calendar, and then he heads out. You know, I just really hate that we don't see folks who, I'm not saying I need to know what color their underwear is, but I'd like to know that they have a life beyond holding somebody's purse. Yeah. And I think someone who's done that really well is not with a queer character, but Walter Mosley with his sidekick character to his Easy Rawlins protagonist is his Mouse character. Mouse we know a lot about now. He's a crazy guy, but we know where he's coming from. We know how he interacts with people. He has more of a 3-dimension than most of these sidekick characters get, and I don't like it when they don't have that.
Edwin.
That's sort of, you know, that's interesting. I was going to say something along the, I always tell my students, I also teach a graduate program. I tell my students to look closely at their secondary characters, and particularly their best friends, which is what Cheryl was just saying. So like, if you think about your protagonist is your main character, and your protagonist can be whomever you want them to be. But think about the people who are adjacent to your protagonist, and like think about the Venn diagram that person, the secondary character, creates with your main character. And so the Venn diagram, the overlapping part of the circle, is the relationship between the protagonist and that friend. But that friend isn't only that overlapping piece. And so I always tell students, you don't have to fill out an entire character sheet. You don't need to know every single thing that could possibly be known about this secondary character, but think about what else is in that person's circle. And so a good example would be like, if you're writing a book about an elephant who has a best friend with a giraffe, the giraffe probably knows other giraffes. And like, you might kind of explore who some of those other giraffes are. So that would be it.
Yeah, and the giraffe probably see the world from a different point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think with like secondary characters, like you don't have to go into their whole backstory, but you can imply a complexity there through just observation that I think acknowledges that they're real human beings, even though you may not be entirely focused on that character or exploring.
Oh, totally. You know, if you just add a sentence in that this secondary character has 3 sisters, it like adds something to who that character is, you know, that you might not have had before. But yeah, just watch your secondary characters.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this is the time in the program when we talk about publishing. You know, what challenges have you faced in your path to publishing? What new challenges do you think are ahead of us? Also, where's successes? We need to hear those too. You know, and just generally like the conversation about, particularly I think LGBT voices, maybe, you know, in the crime writing community as well. And I'm going to finger of fate, Cheryl.
So I think I want to talk about this from a queer perspective, publishers of queer material and the larger publishing industry. I want the larger publishing industry, who is now putting their tippy toes in writing LGBT, bringing on LGBT books and authors, to really mean it and to put a commitment behind their efforts to tell our stories. I want Lambda Literary, I'm going to be having a conversation with them next week. I want them to pay attention to the indie publishers who have been doing this work for decades, putting these LGBTQ stories out into the world in a real relevant way with high quality and real sincerity around the scope of stories that LGBTQ the community has. I want them not to be sidelined and dazzled by the Wizard of Oz dangling all this money and patina by these big publishers for LGBTQ stories, and still manage to support our indie publishers. I write for my series for a small, really high quality indie publisher, Bywater Books.
They're great.
I have a book coming out next year that's done with a Big Five publisher. And so I know there is not equal weight around the kind of resources that can come to bear, but I do know that these indie publishers put a lot of heart and soul and commitment to telling our stories in an authentic way, and over the long haul, when it's not a trend, you know, when it's not looking all glossy, they'll still be telling our stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Bywater is great. Absolutely. Robyn.
Yeah, I'll tell a little bit of a personal viewpoint, because, you know, I've been practicing law for 45 years now. And so I think I'm probably the oldest one here. I didn't go from kindergarten to law school, so there's a few years before that, 45. And you know, I guess I'm just incredibly fortunate in one way, but the message I'd like to you know, say is, you know, again, there, as Cheryl was saying, there's this renewed, or I shouldn't say renewed, oh, maybe I should, because there was a time when it seemed like there was LGBTQ fiction and then it went away, and maybe now it's coming back. But, you know, there does seem to be some interest, and you know, timing wise, you know, as I said, I started writing By Way of Sorrow in 2015 and submitted it, got it out to the world in 18, and it was picked up in three months by Kensington. So, you know, I will say that, you know, if you're wondering, is there a road forward for me to publish in, you know, my LGBTQ novel, you know, is somebody going to pick it up? You know, Cheryl's an example of somebody with a smaller indie. Edwin and I with Kensington, you know, there's publishers out there who are now willing to do this. And, you know, again, from my point of view, I wrote my first novel 48 years ago that never saw the light of day. It's just in a briefcase. And the other piece of advice I would give in terms of publishing is stay with it. Don't give up. And, you know, keep submitting and keep taking those rejections and learning.
Absolutely. Edwin.
Oh, sure. I mean, I'll echo what Robyn just said. I got my first book published when I was 47 years old. I worked for a long time to get it in someone's hands. I worked in the publishing industry for a long time, not in the trade industry, but you know, on the academic side. I worked for Macmillan for a long time, and this is what I'll tell you: publishing is a business. They have a P&L. They have to make a profit. That's how a business is supported, by making a profit. So if you like books by queer authors, go out and buy them, because that's the only way they'll be published. So that's my advice to everyone who's listening.
Just suggesting a few right here. And okay, Meredith.
Yeah, I would echo everything that Cheryl said. You know, I'm kind of in that same boat of working with a very small indie publisher, and knowing that those people, like there's a few of those publishers that have been working hard for decades, like Cheryl said, and that hard work to get the voices out into the world. I mean, it's incredible to think about, really, you know, how long some of them have been publishing and haven't gotten some of the recognition they need. So.
Great. Kelly, I think you're all last.
Yeah. So with my first book, it was I would say a large indie publisher, Skyhorse, Cottonmouth. And of course it seemed forever. I worked on that book probably between 14 to 20 years. It was just a very long process because I also was working, and it's very hard, of course, to focus. But I also just couldn't find comps for the type of thing I was writing. There wasn't a lot of queer crime fiction that agents, I think, knew about or could use as a comp and say, oh yeah, because you also have to do the last 5 years is what they want, right? To see if there's a sales record. And so it was, even in, you know, and that one published in 2017, so up to 2016, it was still very hard to find comps. And so you do this math of like, it's Sarah Waters meets Daniel Boudreaux, you know, and everybody's like, what do you mean? This isn't set in Victorian England. And I'm like, but it's set in the Ozarks, and they're queer, right? So that was difficult. And I will say, you know, echoing everyone, and I think the success we have, and I think the hope for other writers out there is that, I mean, from this panel alone, you can see you have options now. We're all writing in different categories and same genre, but in different flavors. And so I think we have so much more that we can show to agents and publishers, hopefully, of what we have to offer in these authentic voices.
Absolutely. Before I forget, Kelly, your book came up in an earlier session today. Milo Todd did it.
I love Milo.
Characters. So I was like, you know, Cottonmouth is, you know, working its way in. That seems really wonderful.
Yeah.
We have a question from Stephanie Gale. Hey, Stephanie. She asks, what's a book you read as a young person that inspired you to write? And it doesn't have to be a mystery. Anyone want to volunteer, or shall I call?
Oh, what was the question again, John? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Absolutely. It's what's a book you read as a young person that inspired you to write? So what book inspired you to write? And it does not have to be a mystery.
Yeah, I'll jump in right away, because I mean, I've said this before, Catch-22. I was like 15 years old. Obviously, it's not a mystery, but, you know, I was in high school. I had read those high school novels that you had to read, found them pretty boring, and then read Catch-22 on a summer vacation, staying at a house. It was sitting there. I picked it up and read it, and it was dark, and it was funny, it was satirical, it was sad, it just opened my eyes to what a novel could be and made me want to write. I could never write anything remotely like that, but it's been an inspiration for a lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would say, sorry, I'm jumping in.
Jump in.
Sorry. So I'm like, sorry, don't forget. Yeah, I obviously I can't write like Maya Angelou, but I know why the Cage Bird Sang was eye-opening for me, because she's from Stamps, Arkansas, and just the way she wrote the book, my middle school brain was kind of blown away. Kind of like, how can this girl who experienced so much pain and abuse become who she was. And it was a beautiful book, and I'm constantly inspired by that and by her.
Meredith?
Oh, I'm a huge Stephen King fan, and I really didn't like to read when I was young. I was not happy about going to school or any of those things, and I found Stephen King when I was in, I want to say it was like end of 7th grade, right, going into 8th, and I read it, like that huge big book. I read it, and there were parts of it that some of my friends, we would read together out loud. And God, once I read one of his books, I just loved it. And I just went back and read all the other ones. And yeah, I wanted to just be like Stephen King.
Yeah, I remember reading Misery and thing, like still wanting to be a writer after that. So. Cheryl?
I was a little Black girl nerd in Detroit, and I read The Odyssey by Homer, and I'm going like, damn, I want to do all that shit. I want to sail. I want to kill Cyclops, and I want to write about that stuff.
Let's see.
I read this. I really loved adventure stories when I was a kid, and I found this series by a woman named Enid Blyton. She from the UK, and she wrote a series called The Famous Five. And I think this sums up me as a person and me as a writer. The books haven't aged very well, I will say, but The Famous Five were 4 kids and a dog, and they were always out in the English countryside, and they're always like chasing smugglers or, you know, bandits or something like that, or bank robbers or whatever. But it didn't matter what they were doing. It didn't matter how much danger they were in. If it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they stopped and they had tea, and I really appreciated that.
That's a good life lesson, life advice. Okay, so we're running up on time. I want to do a lightning round quickly before we close things out. And I'm just going to ask you for one bit of quick advice. It can be a book recommendation. It can be, you know, a technique or something that you can impart on our audience. And then we'll wrap things up. And I will begin with Edwin.
Oh, write badly. First drafts are always awful, 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 and just get through it.
I like it. Robyn.
Don't give up. Don't take those rejection letters from query letters or publishers as failures. They're not. It's part of the learning process. It's part of the process that we've all gone through. Don't give up. Keep at it. You'll get there.
Meredith.
Well, I'll give a little, this is something that I've been working with. I don't know if you can see this book by Matt Bell called Refuse to Be Done. How to write a novel and rewrite a novel in 3 drafts. And I've been working through that as I'm trying to come up with some topics now. And it's been really helpful for me. It might be helpful for others too.
Kelly.
I would say tenacity always, and as Robyn said, never giving up. And also, I think the more you do it, the easier it becomes, especially around rejection. There's so much rejection and heartache in this, but I've gotten it down to like a 24-hour period where I can have my feelings and then get right back up into it the next day. And I think that's a really important thing because so many people just stop. So be the person who doesn't stop.
Absolutely. Cheryl.
Folks always tell you to write what you know, but I would say write what you feel passionate about. That's so much more important. You can always get to know something if you do the homework, but the things that give you passion, the words will organically pour off the page.
Yeah, absolutely. And my advice is to, find your community. I'm sitting on a panel here with folks in my community who I love and admire, and I think that's so important. And part of being a community member is coming to things like OutWrite and, buying queer books. And, I think that's so important. And it really helps when you're going through the downs or the rough times to have that support there. So thank you all so much for spending your Sunday afternoon with me and coming to OutWrite. And please do, you can find these authors' books on the OutWrite bookshop page, which I think Malik might have put in the feed on YouTube. And have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, folks.
Great seeing everyone.
Yes.
Take care.
Bye.
Cool.